Welcome to the Inspired Conversations podcast, hosted by me, Andrea Cova-Bernal. As a college counselor, I'm inspired not only by the incredible students I work with, but also by remarkable change makers in higher education, each with powerful stories of their own. Through storytelling and shared narratives, I believe in the power of connection. Join me as we delve into dialogue and share valuable advice for college success. Welcome to the Inspired Conversations podcast. If you're just tuning in with us, it's such a special honor to introduce our guest today. I'm going to go ahead and get to Sonia in a little bit, but welcome to those folks who are in the audience. Welcome to everybody who's tuning in. Today is, I think, a perfect day to focus on mental health, self-care, therapy, and just ourselves. I think there's been so much going on in the world. There's so much going on in higher education that this couldn't have come at a better time, Sonia. So thank you so much for being here. How are you, Sonia?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Well, I'm definitely interested and excited to jump into your story. But before I do that, I just want to share a little bit more about why we're here and why the Inspired Conversations podcast started. I, as an educator, as a counselor for about 15 years now, I have seen and heard so many incredible stories from my students. During the pandemic, so many of them felt voiceless and felt like they didn't have a space in higher ed institutions because, so much was taken away from them. So I started my first podcast then where I was sharing the student stories and giving them a platform to showcase the amazing things that we're doing. But at the same time, Sonia, all through these 15 years, I've also met some incredible folks in access and in education and the mental health world and in higher ed period who have amazing stories of your own. And especially in light of the new, the affirmative action, SCOTUS case and all of the new decisions in higher ed that have been made, I just so desperately wanted our students to feel like they had people on these campuses and people in these spaces who hear them, who have similar stories to them and can resonate with them. And so you, again, I know have a really powerful story that I'm excited to get to right now. And all of it starts at the very beginning with where we're from, our childhood. Sometimes it's really hard for students to get that out, right? They don't necessarily think all of what they grew up with has that power in them. So can we start with yours, Sonia? Can you tell just a little bit about where you come from, where you grew up, and how your childhood sort of impacted where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much, Andrea, for the invitation. When I first, read your email and saw the invite, I was super excited. I know that we've collaborated in the past, also being able to speak to some of your students. So once again, my name is Sonia Salazar, and I am currently practicing as a licensed marriage and family therapist. I am the oldest daughter of three. I have two younger sisters that I'm very, very close to and that I love dearly with all my heart. They are my rock. And my parents grew up in Mexico. So the way I always like to say when I introduce myself and share about, where I grew up and where I come from, my mom is from the South. My dad is from the North. So for those people who are Mexican and know a little bit about the Mexican culture, two completely different ones within the same, country. But I grew up in different neighborhoods. My parents actually met in Lincoln Heights, and that's where I lived. I believe it was like the first 2 years of my life. We then moved out to Bell, moved out to Chicago for about a year, and then decided to come back, make our way back. And then we went ahead and lived in Echo Park. So we've been sort of around the LA area. But I am the oldest also on both sides of my maternal and paternal family. So first granddaughter on both sides, the oldest one. So that's a lot of responsibility that I carry on my shoulders.
Yeah. So all of your primos, primas, sisters,
Younger than me.
everything, you have a lot of people looking up to you. And feeling guided by your path. That's exciting. And speaking of Echo Park, actually, that's sort of how we met. We actually met through a nonprofit organization called Hola, Heart of Los Angeles, actually in the heart of MacArthur Park in Rampart District. And I like to share in my podcast the true impact of network. As a student and really even as a high school, whatever age you are at this point, it's the people that you meet sort of along the way who become, I call it, yeah, like your board of directors, your support team, your allies in this world. And so can you share a little bit about your upbringing in that area and how that sort of influenced the type of work you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I believe, if I recall correctly, my family and I started living in Echo Park around maybe I want to say maybe 8 or 9 years old. So I was still in elementary, and I attended a local elementary school just a couple of blocks down the street. It was called Union Avenue Elementary. I then went on to middle school, Virgil Middle School, and then Belmont High School. So all very local. And I think middle school was the beginning of my journey, really, as to my career and what I wanted to do. And so did high school, but there was one significant event during middle school that really sort of set, now as I've been able to reflect, that really set that fire for me. So in middle school, I went in as a sixth grader, straight A student, was doing really, really well. And then seventh grade came around. And now as a therapist, I understand sort of the transitions a little bit more developmentally for students. So seventh grade wasn't my best year. I ended up failing every single class. I was not on the right track. And that year during parent conferences, I would hid from my mom, the dates, the times, because I didn't want her to come in. I didn't want her to see that I was failing every single class. And I knew that eventually the report card would make it home and that she would see that. I just wasn't ready to face it in that moment during parent conferences. But my mom eventually did find out. She showed up. She surprised me during parent conferences week. You are let out early. It's an early dismissal. And so I was heading out with my friends to go hang out with them. And I see my mom, and she comes into the school, and she me dio una regañada. She literally, got so upset and was like, how come you didn't tell me? So I had no way out. I ended up having to go through every single class so that she can hear from my teachers how badly and poorly I was doing academically and failing their classes. But there was one particular teacher, which was my science teacher. And I do recall, even throughout the semester, when we wouldn't complete homework assignments, when we wouldn't behave in his class, sort of like our punishment, right, was to clean out his fish tank. And he would make us do literally like labor in his classroom for him,
Mm.
clean out
Mm.
his fish tank, wash his food dishes. Um, and now, as I think about it, and I've been able to reflect and work, through that healing journey,
Mhm.
I often wonder, what did he think about us as
Mm.
brown students, low income, right? The type of punishment that we would receive for not doing good academically. But he went ahead and met with my mom. He had a translator. And during that conference, I remember my body shaking. I was sweating. I was so nervous, like on the verge of tears. And he asked the translator to tell my mom that there was no reason for her to waste her time showing up to parent conferences, because I was never going to go ahead and graduate from high school, and that I would end up with children and marrying a gangster.
Wow.
And that was at parent conference. And I do remember very clearly, I have this vivid memory in my head of looking at my mom, and she would go from pale to red to sweating, and just to see the anger in her face. And now I understand that underneath that anger, there was a lot of sadness and disappointment. And so that really sort of set the fire for me. And after that parent conference, I remember telling myself, I'm going to prove him wrong. I'm going to prove him and everybody else wrong. So then that led me into, high school. Luckily, I was part of an academy where it was very specific to student activism was part of our curriculum. And so I remember we even working with one of our history teachers, we created a class on Mexican history.
Wow.
It was not one of our, general education classes. It was just something we wanted as students. Our history teacher went along with it. And so he created an extra period that then we would be able to sign up for. And we always would take turns to be sort of like the watch person outside of the classroom in case an administrator was walking by. We all knew right away to pull down, the other board, hide our books, hide everything. And so very early on in high school, I started to learn about student activism, and I carry that with me to UCSB.
Wow. Oh my gosh. And I love that, Belmont is sort of one of those schools. I think back then there was also, were there tracks back then in your high
Yes.
school? And,
Yes.
things like that, where students are sort of filtered and tunneled into these spaces that already dictate where perhaps,
Yeah.
other people think they should be, which, is again part of this like social justice and education piece, but you mentioned, which I really want to emphasize today, is that piece of activism. And I think so many young men and women who are growing up and, maybe inner city Los Angeles or neighborhoods where they often get these teachers who tell them, don't stop trying, you're not going to make it. They'll lose that fire. That's such an easy way for them to not want to walk over that red tape, like I like to say, or feel like they can do it. But the truth is that there are so many spaces that want to hear them, that want to see them and want to, protect them. And so how did you get to, so you said UCSB. So for those who are tuning in today, UC Santa Barbara, it's part of the larger public education system here in California. And it is a big campus, right? There are a lot of also tell me actually, is it very ethnically diverse there? Did you feel like you sort of had a a space over there?
Yeah, so I went to UC Santa Barbara. I started in 2005. So I do remember clearly when I would go onto the website to look just at the campus because I didn't have an opportunity to visit any of the college campuses that I was applying to. My visits were sort of virtual visits, but there was no videos, it was just pictures. And so that's how I would get the information from Santa Barbara. And I do remember looking at the breakdown of the demographics of males and females, and then, by race or ethnicity. And I do remember very clearly that the number was closer to about 60% white and about 14% Latino. And then Black students and Asians and Native Americans was even lower. So it was really a difficult transition because my high school was primarily Latino students and Black students. And so going to Santa Barbara, to me, it was just a sea of white people. That's, as an 18-year-old, that's what I saw. And it was really, I had a difficult time in the beginning finding my group, finding my gente, my raza, my people, because I had to witness and experience a lot of racism in the dorms. I remember very clearly one time walking down my hallway and one of the rooms, which was two females, two white females, they had not closed their door completely. And I clearly remember, and I still, even when I talk about it, I feel it in my body. They were sort of plotting on how they were going to say that one of the Latino male students had sexually abused them. And they were rehearsing what they were going to say. And that was my introduction to Santa Barbara. I knew in that moment that I wasn't safe. And so throughout Santa Barbara, I knew I needed to keep that activism alive. And I wanted to, even though there was fear underneath it all. So I started to look for the groups on campus. And I ended up joining a group called Mujer, which stood for Mujeres Unidas por Justicia, Educación y Revolución at that time. The name has now changed to be a little bit more inclusive of all people. And so that's really where the activism, that fire just blew even bigger for me. And I ended up joining as a freshman, stayed in that student org all throughout my 4 years. And my last, I believe it was my junior year, my third year in college, I ended up being one of the co-chairs. And so during that time of activism, I was the one at rallies, at protests. I had the microphone with me. I would, get people to start chanting and just really participate in sit-ins as well. Anything that we needed to make sure that our voices were being heard and that we
Mhm.
were making demands that, really weren't demands. They were things we needed and that we wanted and that we deserved as students. And so that activism ended up leading me into a very dark moment in my journey in higher ed because as a result of that, I got a death threat. And in this death threat, this person wrote very specific information that let me know that I was being watched, that they were following me, that they had studied my moves, my schedule, like where I would go on Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And they described in detail what they were going to do to me and why. And the why was because they weren't okay with my activism. They weren't okay with what I stood for. So that led me to coming back home to Echo Park for about 6 months. And during those 6 months, I had to go back to therapy, very intensive therapy. I remember I couldn't sleep in the dark. I couldn't even shower by myself. I remember my middle sister Betty would sit in the toilet with me while I would shower, and I didn't want any windows open. If we had to go to therapy and my mom had to drive me, I would like hide so that
Mhm.
I wouldn't be a vision in the car. So it was a really, really dark time for me. Um, and part of me did not want to go back to Santa Barbara. So what I ended up doing, I knew I wanted to finish college. So I went ahead and applied to UCLA. I got a meeting with admissions, but essentially during that meeting, I was told that, they couldn't offer me a transfer because I was now deemed as a high profile student. So if something was to
Oh my God.
happen,
Mhm.
basically they didn't want that to happen on their campus. And so
Wow.
we're talking, 2007-ish. I doubt that something like that maybe would happen nowadays. Maybe it does, but there's a lot more backup for students. So I feel really lonely. And ultimately, I decided to go back to Santa Barbara and finish my education. I didn't want this individual to dictate my success or what I stood for. And that the activism, that fire that has always been within me.
Gosh, Sonia, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I mean, I know just to unpack all of that and, retell that story, I think that's just a perfect example how I feel like students, especially BIPOC students, FGLI students, just can feel lost easily. But in your case, you felt threatened. And I just I cannot say how hard it is to hear that as an educator, that in any way, shape, or form a student feels at all threatened in the space that they're getting their education, And so I'm so sorry that happened to you. I can feel just the energy in you, though, and the fire that lit, and in your family, like you said earlier, and that's something I wanted to bring it back to is you sort of carry a lot of a lot of the weight and a lot of the energy on your shoulders for your family, for your primas, for your sisters. And so you were the first one to go to college. How much of that sort of impacted your drive and your push to just keep going?
Yeah, that weight that I you and let me correct what I said earlier. I used to carry that weight. I don't think that I fully carry it now with me. I've worked a lot through my own therapy of learning how to let go of that.
Mm.
But I mean, it's generational, it's traditional, right? I come from a Latino family, so it's always sort of constantly there. But I think at that time, it really did feel that activism, that fire. I knew in that moment I didn't want to let myself down primarily. I didn't want to let my parents down. I didn't want to let my sisters down. I didn't want to let my family down.
Mhm.
I knew in that moment I am the example. That's what I grew up, you know, listening to and hearing. And that was the message, like, you need to do this because your siblings, your cousins are watching, right? So at that moment, it did play a big role into me wanting to go back and finish and continue to be an activist.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's actually something that can resonate with a lot of first gen students or students that, come from a similar background is just feeling like they're doing all of it for everyone else, right? For their families, for the people that, who can be impacted later or who influence later. And so I can see that a lot with my students who have so much responsibility at home as the eldest, not even the eldest sometimes, but just to be that that person for their families, or their parents who have struggled to get them to where they are right now. And so I can feel that impact for them. And so you mentioned something that I think is really powerful in this conversation is that you went to therapy. You decided that that was sort of the best option for you to sort of overcome the darkness you were going through. How was that experience? I know in traditional Latino cultures, I'm as a Latina myself, I feel like there's just a huge stigma of trying to get help when you need it the most. So, what are your thoughts on that, and how much did that impact and influence your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question, Andrea. So let me actually go back because that was not the first time that I had gone to therapy. So at the age of around, I want to say 15, 16, I think it was right after my quinceañera, or maybe a little bit before. But
Mhm.
my mom actually took me to therapy. And, nowadays I think of, how resourceful was she? How did she know about therapy? Where did
Mhm.
she ask? And I think those are questions I haven't really asked her and gotten a clear answer to. But she did it. She found a community mental health place, took me to therapy. And the reason why she was taking me to therapy was because era bien enojona. So I was this child who had a lot of anger inside of her. And so she sort of took me to the therapist, and I think her hope was like, here, fix her. Little did she know, as therapists, we don't really fix people, right? So
Mhm.
that was my introduction to therapy. And I had an amazing therapist. Her name is Michelle. And to this day, I think of her because she really taught me the power of compassion, of silence, and holding my feelings through that silence, just sitting with them, and really just understanding where the anger was coming from. So it was
Mhm.
after that first experience as a 16-year-old, when I finished my treatment with Michelle, I remember walking very clearly out of that office, very emotional because I had to say goodbye to her. But as I was walking out, silently, I told myself, I want to be like Michelle. And
Wow.
that was the moment where I knew I wanted to be a therapist.
Mm.
So fast forward to UCSB, and that very dark moment, that experience, it was very easy for me to go back. I actually was the one that told my mom, like, I want to go to therapy. So my mom right away enrolled me. And through that treatment, we just worked through a lot of the anxiety, the fear, coping skills. So it wasn't my first time. It was different both occasions, but there was a lot of underlying issues too that were coming up during that period as well. So for me, the stigma really wasn't there because my mom introduced me to therapy at a very young age, and I had such an amazing experience with my first therapist.
Mhm. Yeah, and your mom sounds like she was a really strong woman. It sounds like she's made a huge impact, and was very much a, resourceful, I should say, right? The fact that she found Ola and found resources for you all to, build your education and get the network that you needed. And so speaking of sort of, staying in places and building a network, you decided to go back to Santa Barbara. What did you end up getting your degree in at that point? And how was the end of your experience there? You're also a really active member still there. So can you share a little bit more about that and what brought you to sort of, feel energized with remaining so, active in the community?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did end up going back, and I ended up getting my bachelor's degree in Chicana studies, sociology, and then two minors, applied psychology and education. So even then, I was setting the path for myself, in this huge belief, right, that what mental and emotional wellness needs to be part of a student's college plan. It needs to be part of it. So I ended up getting my degree in that. I actually had so many extra credits. So when I went to Santa Barbara, I had already taken college classes, community college classes. So I went in with a lot of credits, and I could have graduated in 3 years, but because I had to take those 6 months, when I went back, that fuel was still there, that fire. So I picked up the two minors and I said, why not? Let's just do it, So I
Yeah.
ended up doing that. And, I like to believe that I ended feeling really strong about my path forward, even though it wasn't easy, right? Um, Part of my college experience, aside from the death threat that I received, there was a lot of racism, a lot of racial discrimination. I remember walking down the street, through the fraternity row or fraternity street, and I sometimes would wear some very cultural Mexican, shirts, very flowery. And I
Mhm.
remember getting, calls from some of the frat boys, Mexican, go back to your home country. And I remember walking through that, and in my head, I was all like, well, going back means going back to LA because that's where I'm from. But in that moment, it felt heavy, and there was a lot of anger that came about that. So, and there was a lot of other instances. So needless to say, once I graduated from Santa Barbara, it took me a while to go back and revisit the campus. And for years, whenever I had to go back to either take students to see the campus, to share about the campus, every time I would drive into the campus, I would feel this like pain in the pit of my stomach, like in my gut. And I remember like swallowing really hard, and just all those memories, those triggers would come back.
Mhm.
Years later, as I've processed a lot of things in my own therapy, I have learned to let go of that and make peace with it, and just accept that this was my journey, this was my story, and that it happened to me for a reason and for a
Mhm.
purpose. And I think that purpose ultimately was to keep that fire alive. It was tests that were put in front of me to see if I could keep going, and I did. And so now, as an alumni of UC Santa Barbara, I am part of the Chicanx Latinx Alumni Network. So it is the very first Latino Chicano alumni group in Santa Barbara. There was none until a few years ago. And
Wow.
so
Awesome.
I am part of it, and it's five of us, five volunteers. So I do serve as the co-director of outreach and recruitment. And I think that's just, for me, it's like a given, because it's very easy for me to talk to people and engage in conversation. And so I was like, sign me up for that one. I can talk to students.
Yeah. Yeah, I love, and I can resonate with that. I think, I went to a private liberal arts college here in Los Angeles, definitely a PWI. And I'm also part of their Latino Alumni Association. This year I'm serving as the president, and a lot of folks ask me, especially a lot of my peers, like, but why? Like, did Oxy really do all of that for you? And I'm like, you know what? Yes, it did. Like, I know that we were, in a space where we often maybe weren't heard, but our active, we were really encouraged to speak our mind when we're there. And in fact, my major, critical theory and social justice, was essentially a student-led initiative. And I was part of the very first class to graduate with that degree because we really fought for a degree in that field. And I just say, there are so many things that were wrong, right? So many things that could be better, but that's why I'm doing this work, because I want to see the students that are there feel, I want them to know that there are people, allies, volunteers, alumni who have gone through it. So, I commend you for giving back to a space where you had so much, like you said, that deep pit in your stomach. But I'm sure the fact that can showcase to them how much you made it through, is a true impact. And I know that the numbers are growing at UC Santa Barbara in terms of diversity, which makes me so high. It's now one of the most diverse, actually, UCs,
Absolutely. Yes,
which
it
is
definitely is.
so powerful, in just 15 years, how much you've done. So
Yeah,
that's awesome.
absolutely. And Andrea, part of volunteering for this alumni group was also a way for me to reclaim my
Mm,
story, right? UC Santa Barbara will forever be part of my story, but it didn't define me. And when I agreed to volunteer as part of this alumni group, it no longer came from like the pit of my stomach. It came from a place of empowerment and love and wanting to give back, but primarily for me, to allow
Mhm.
myself to rewrite my story, that it didn't have to end there in 2009, but that now I could go back and I'm stronger mentally, emotionally, that I know I belong, that I know that that was a place for me. Maybe the message was different at that time, but now I know that I can take up space. And this is one way to do it.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, take up that space. That's what we need you for. I think, again, in light of, I keep bringing it back to this in a lot of the podcast interviews, is the SCOTUS decision. And I think that my biggest message for students is to know, like, take up that space, keep applying, because it's not in any way deterring from, your ability to be in these spaces. So thank you for sharing that. Now, I do want to so there are some audience members. If you have any questions for Sonia, go ahead and start posing them in the chat box. But I do want to get to resources, because one of the reasons I really wanted to bring you on today is, high school and college students, especially now, we had COVID. We just endured a 3-4 year long pandemic. Students have had a major shift in their educational journey, and I can see it in just this 3-year time span. The level of mental health and just self-care and energy that's there, that our students truly need therapy. And so, can you just, let's transition to that if we can. How in your career are you advising, let's start with high school students, to sort of get through these difficult years right now, and what is some advice you have for them?
Yeah, so I do work with quite a few high school students, and actually, I think right now in the moment, I had maybe a handful that are now have graduated, and so now we're transitioning them into college, and I'm going to stay on because one of the things that the pandemic brought on is being able to do virtual therapy, so it
Yeah.
allows me to go along with them on their college journey. But as high school students, the one thing that I have been focusing on in the last maybe 2 years during pandemic, now that we're sort of post pandemic, is on their anxiety. So there's a lot of anxiety that's coming up with students, and not only with the students, but with their parents as well. So one of the things that I focus a lot in therapy and working with them is helping them to identify where this anxiety is coming from. What are the feelings that are coming up? Where do they feel it in their body? That's something that I've been getting into, a lot more focusing on with students. Where do you feel this in your body? Because a lot of students
Mm.
of color, trauma is experienced not just through your day to day, but you experience it in your body, whether it's chronic pain, whether stomach aches, headaches, whatever that might be. So the focus with them is self awareness and insight. So that once you have that self awareness and insight, and you know that you need help, or you can identify, this is what I need in this moment, or this is how I can express my feelings and thoughts to people, right? Then you're able to receive and seek the help that you need. So, really setting with high school students is really setting that foundation, just giving them that space to talk, to come in and vent at times. Sometimes sessions are not necessarily completely therapeutic. They just need to come and vent about things that are bothering them, or things that are happening in their day to day, or they're dating, or so and so doesn't
Mm.
like me. And all of those things are extremely important, because regardless, they let you into their life. But a lot of the focus aside also is that transition into college. If I do get a sophomore or a junior, they're extremely stressed about the classes they need to take. They need to do well. Their finals are coming up. So, really just teaching them how to cope with all of that, setting a foundation.
And what advice would you give them if they, like, what are some coping, maybe just one or two sort of coping methods that you would say, for high school students, or even just resources? Like, if you're feeling lost, I noticed today also, or, in this day and age, there is so much pressure to be perfect right now. I mean, they have social media and they have things at their fingertips, instant gratification, this age group. I mean, they grew up in front of a screen. And so I do see this sort of level of pressure that they're putting on themselves to just be perfect. So, what are some ways that you would encourage them to sort of disconnect and, come to terms with their self care and be there mentally and present sometimes?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So one of the things I like to incorporate music in my sessions. I think up to now, every single client I've had in my office in my therapy space loves music. So at times I do go on this journey with them of creating albums. Through Spotify or whatever platform they have, and they have their happy music, their calm down music, their sad music when sometimes they need to just release. So one of those coping skills is using music, right? Music moves you, it moves your soul. Sometimes an artist, a song that they created, expresses what you're feeling, something you can't put into words, but you feel it through the music. I do talk to them a lot about, I start tapping into what their interests or hobbies are, and then using those, having them create that awareness, like you're already doing self-care, you're already using
Mhm.
some of these coping skills. It's not labeled as coping skills, it's just something that they like to do. So movement is a big part of it. I have clients who like to dance. I have clients who play sports, and it goes beyond that. All of that is part of self-care. Self-care, mental, emotional health is not just going to therapy and talking to someone. That is one way to do it, but you
Mm.
have to tap into other tools, alternative tools, in order to take care of your mental and emotional health. So music, movement. I do introduce my clients into meditation or mindfulness. Meditation or mindfulness is not for everyone, but it is my job to introduce them to it and have them figure out for themselves if it is something that they like. And I even use that with my middle school students as well. They like to come in and I hear it from parents like, yeah, they were getting really upset and they were like, I need 5 minutes to meditate. And that just makes me so happy because that lets me know they're learning how to regulate their emotions rather than just reacting.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of music. I mean, in fact, I think adults should use that technique. Everybody should use that technique because we all love music. And how beautiful is it to have playlists for every emotion that you're having so you can literally just push play and feel it out? And speaking of meditation, you're absolutely right. I think it's not for everybody, but I do think there are simple ways to do it. Prior to my position right now, I worked at an all girls high school, as you may know, and part of our daily routine was to do transcendental meditation, and they taught the entire school how to meditate for 15-20 minutes every day. So at the same time all the lights were off, we were all just stopping and meditating, and I wholeheartedly believe if you learn how to do it in any way, shape, or form, it can totally be transformative. So
Absolutely.
yeah, and I think especially for college students, so like transitioning into that, um, oh man, talk about the weight that they carry. Talk about just the energy. And I see it a lot because I primarily work with students who actually end up leaving home. They go to schools on the East Coast and schools in different parts of America where they're literally uplifting their lives for an education. And I want to say I probably get about 5 calls every September, October from students who are just like, I can't do this, Andrea. Like, what did I do? Crying, just I want to go back. How can I transfer home? You know? And the hard part about it is when they call their parents,
Mhm.
oftentimes the response is, it's okay, mijo. It's okay, mija. We'll find you a flight. Let's come home and we'll find you a school. And instead of just encouraging, but I get it. So let's just go to really quick college students. What kind of advice could we give them as they make this life-altering transition, whether you're up the street 40 minutes away or you're 3,000 miles away for this transition?
Absolutely. So I will share what I start to do with the seniors that I do see in therapy because I think it translates into college students as well. And this is something college students can do even now. But what a part of the treatment once they're transitioning into college is I dedicate quite a few sessions into once they've made their decision what college they're going to, I dedicate a few sessions into bringing my laptop. If they have one, I have them bring it into session also. And we go ahead and go on the school website and sort of do like a virtual tour together, get a list of all the student organizations. Sometimes they're listed and they all have an explanation, and we go through them. I'll ask them, which one sounds of interest to you? Oh, that one sounds really good. And those are the moments where I get to share just bits and pieces of the student groups that I was part of in Santa Barbara, because I feel like it does motivate them to look into them. And then one of the things that I really focus on is going on to the counseling page. And so once my seniors go ahead and transition over to college, I actually give them a therapy assignment. And so I have them go and find the counseling center. And I tell them to, bring back brochures, pamphlets, whatever they find there. And I give them a list of questions, so almost like a scavenger hunt. I have them do it. And I said, and, you'll report back to me next week. We'll see what what type of information you found out. And that's just to expose them, right? To really encourage them and expose them into, these are services that you have available for you. You have me, and we meet once a week. But if you ever have a crisis, you go to that center, right? You don't wait for me or for me to respond. If you need someone immediately, you go, and they will assign you someone that's there so that you can go ahead and process or problem solve. Those are some of the things that I do. I also have them explore and find out, is there a hotline on campus in case they have a crisis, or in case, life happens in college, and so maybe you become suicidal. So is there a hotline that you can call specifically for your campus? Is there a crisis response team that's available for you? Is there a case manager available for you? What are other programs? Is there, student-led therapy groups, right, that you can be part of? So I do that with my seniors who are transferring into college, and I would give the same advice to college students right now. Really find your group, find your people, especially for Latino students. We come from big families at times, some of us from small families, but nonetheless, it's that feeling of family and support. It's your village. You gotta find your village in college too. That is what's gonna help pull you through as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And I think that for a lot of college students too, I think they think, how do I say this? In real time. They act in real time. Oh, I need to get therapy. Now I got to go seek it out. Or, oh, I'm a senior and I got to find a job. Okay, now I'm going to go to the career center, where, all of these doors are wide open the moment you get on campus. But not only that, you're paying for it, right? Like you're already investing in all of these resources, and take it from somebody who I always say this now, if only I knew then what I know now as a college advisor and college counselor. I hardly took advantage of the resources on campus just because I felt like I didn't need them. And now it's just, I think now students just need to walk through those doors the moment that they step on these campuses, so that they know these resources are there when they need them, not immediately, or not in real time, I guess I should say.
Absolutely. It's doing some of that preventative work,
Yes,
right?
thank you.
Even though the mental health movement is more, it's more received by people, it's more welcome, right? It's really out there in your face now. I can't recall in 2005 when I started college, there wasn't really, not even, what was it? Facebook was the platform that we were all on. There was no ads for therapy or anything related to mental health. And now there's so much out there for students. But I do want to recognize and acknowledge there is still a stigma. It depends on your family unit, your family dynamics, right? But if there's anything that I would like to share with high school students, college students, is therapy is not something you go to because there's something wrong with you, or you need to fix something, right? Therapy nowadays is a plática, a charla, a talk, just a space for you, for your therapist to hold you, to hold your emotions, to hold whatever is going on with you, and to walk that path with you. There doesn't have to be anything wrong in that moment. You can simply go and say, I've been wanting to try it out. I've heard about it. Let your therapist guide you through that process also.
Yeah, I love that. That actually gave me a little chill right there because I think adults, parents, everybody needs to hear that message. It's not just for folks who have something wrong or feel like they do. Amazing. And so, gosh, I hate having to shut it off now, but have a few questions. I feel like these conversations can go on for hours because they're so powerful, but I do want to get to a question that came through the chat box. And guest Eileen, if you're on the call, if you want to unmute yourself and ask the question, you're more than welcome to. This is meant to be an interactive podcast. If not, I can go ahead and ask it for you.
Yeah, happy to. I know Sonia, and I've asked her these questions several times just because when I was looking for therapy, obviously I'm trying to figure things out sometimes, but I feel you both would definitely be equipped to even provide for the larger masses. But wanted to get thoughts and advice on knowing when you found quote unquote like a good therapist, because I've had lots of friends who have had terrible interactions. They're like, you know what, first person ruined it. I'm not going to therapy anymore. But you know, want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Eileen. I'm so glad you're here. um, yeah, that's a really, really good question. So I think one of the things, the most important things is figuring out if you feel connected to your therapist in the sense of the first time you meet with them, right? That gut feeling again, right? Our body speaks to us, our mind, our heart, our soul speak to us. Do you feel a connection with that therapist? On your first maybe appointment or consultation, nowadays a lot of therapists will offer like a 15-minute 20-minute consultation. They just want to get a sense of what's bringing you in and then share a little bit with you of what they're picking up and how they can help you. But typically is after that first meeting, walking into that space, I think it's also important for you to interview your therapist. And I encourage all of my clients to do that. I'm like, you must have some
Mm.
questions, right? I know you're curious about certain things. So really asking them, their background, how long they've been practicing, maybe questions. I welcome also questions like, how did you get into this? I think students, professional, young adults are also curious. We're human beings. We seek connection, right? So somebody that you have a connection with, somebody that makes you feel welcome, somebody that opens that door for you to also ask questions, right? But I do want to acknowledge that a lot of the times, that first appointment, you might not really get a sense for all of that, right? You might have to go through a few appointments. But I do want to say, if you feel after a few appointments like there's no really a connection with your therapist, don't sit there and force yourself to go through that process, right? Sometimes right away. And I think us as therapists, we also understand we might not be the right fit for every single client or every referral that we get, right? And that's okay, because ultimately what we want you to have is a great experience in therapy. So you can talk to your therapist and say, you know what, I feel like maybe we don't have a connection, invite that dialogue. But you also have the right to end services with that therapist and seek another one. And so if that's what you need to do that. Don't just sit through something that doesn't feel right for you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really great advice. And actually, again, I think something that everybody can take away. I think we feel like we have to settle. It's finding that love connection is really important. Um,
Absolutely.
we have one more question from somebody who signed up earlier, and this is sort of a great way to end. What excited you what excites you the most about your profession?
Yeah, excuse me. Um, I honestly, I just think seeing the growth in my clients. Therapy is not a quick process. Therapy is a very slow process, and both client and therapist need to be very patient through that process. And I think what excites me the most is just to see, when I see in treatment a client have like an epiphany, or this light bulb goes off, or I start to notice the way that they're speaking, picking up on some of that therapeutic language, right? But really, I really do think ultimately it's just seeing the growth in them,
Mm.
when they're able to come in and automatically they're just more calm, They're just more grounded. And having them share with me too what they've learned throughout treatment. I think the possibility of healing and growth is what keeps me in my career. I truly do believe that if people give themselves an opportunity, they can grow and heal, just like I did, just like I'm doing. That journey never stops. There's no beginning or there's no end. It's just ongoing all the time. And so I really, truly believe that people are capable of that. And that's what keeps me going.
I love that's such a beautiful way to just sort of round it out. I know I feel the love in this conversation. And I think as a counselor, a lot of counselors have been listening to the podcast from what I hear. And I think as a counselor, we carry a lot and we're not necessarily trained to sort of separate that sometimes, from our daily lives and our energies and our families. And it is really hard as a counselor for us to find that, find that separation and know that our lives are important too. So thank you for being here, Sonia. I can't tell you how much this has helped me in this conversation. And, I know that there are probably tons of resources that we want to share for parents, for students of all different levels, and then also for counselors. So for folks who weren't able to join us today, in the description of the podcast, which will be published on all podcast platforms later, we'll be sure to insert some links there for, meditation apps or, online resources, maybe support groups for college students so that you have easy access to all of these resources. And before we leave today, is there any last piece of advice you would give to just anybody who's seeking therapy or any student who is carrying that weight on their back into their journeys, whatever that journey is?
Yeah, absolutely. You don't have to carry that weight or that pain alone. There is always someone out there who's willing to listen. And if maybe you're not ready for therapy, start by reaching out to someone you trust, someone that can hold space for you, someone that is willing to simply listen to you, right? Our stories matter. They're important. Our voices matter as well. And you don't have to carry this by yourself.
I love it. Thank you so much, Sonia. Hopefully we can have more of these conversations to come. For all of our guests today, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Inspired Conversations podcast. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into this inspired conversation where I interviewed an incredible changemaker in higher education. I'm your host, Andrea Cova-Bernal, and for a list of upcoming interviews, follow Inspired Conversations Pod on Instagram and click the link in my bio. If you are tuning in today and have questions about college applications, college success, or financial aid, you're not alone. I've been a college access and success counselor for many years, and I've got your back. Email me at counselorcova@gmail.com. Again, that's counselorcova@gmail.com. Remember, your success is our community's success, and you got this. I'll see you next time.